While medieval European kings struggled to produce a single male heir, one Viking chieftain managed to father 23 children with 7 different wives, all living under the same roof. The polygamous system that made this possible reveals a side of Viking society that historians have kept hidden for centuries. The year was 936 AD, and in the Great Hall of Jelling, Denmark, King Gorm the Old surveyed his extraordinary household. The 7 women, each bearing the title of wife, moved through the smoky interior with practiced efficiency. Hiwasau pause intua, first second situsumen. Some tended infants at their breast, others supervised older children learning weapon craft. This wasn't fantasy, this was calculated Viking political strategy. Archaeological excavations at Ledra reveal longhouse foundations designed specifically for polygamous households. The largest structure contained separate sleeping chambers, each with different levels of luxury. Grave goods from associated burial sites show women interred with varying amounts of wealth, clear evidence of the wife hierarchy that governed Viking royal households. At the apex of this system stood the husfrigga, the primary wife whose sons would inherit the throne. She wore the keys to the household on her belt, controlled the family wealth, and decided which children would receive education in statecraft. Her word was law among the other wives, and her approval could mean the difference between a child's noble future or slavery. Below the primary wife came the frilla, officially recognized concubines, whose children had legal rights, but limited inheritance. These women often came from conquered territories, their noble birth making them valuable political assets. Their beauty mattered less than their bloodlines, which could cement alliances between hostile kingdoms or validate claims to foreign territories. At the bottom were the ambat wives, slave women elevated to marital status, whose children occupied the most precarious position. Though their sons might become great warriors, they possessed no inheritance rights. These women lived in constant fear that political changes could reduce their children to thraldom, yet some achieved remarkable influence through their intelligence and cunning. Managing such a household required military-level organization. Each wife controlled specific domestic domains. One oversaw food production, another managed textile work, a third supervised the thralls. Conflicts were inevitable, often erupting into violence that could leave scars lasting generations. Children learned early that survival depended on understanding the complex web of alliances within their own family. The 23 children of King Gorm faced vastly different futures based on their mother's status. Sons of the primary wife received weapons training and political education. Concubines' children might become warriors or craftsmen. Slave wives' children, despite royal blood, often ended up as servants to their half-brothers, their father's blood insufficient to overcome their mother's status. Viking polygamy wasn't about pleasure, it was warfare by other means. Each pregnancy was a political statement, each birth a potential alliance or threat. Wives competed viciously for their husband's attention, not from jealousy, but because their children's survival depended on maintaining favor. Some resorted to poison, others to seduction, many to political manipulation that would impress modern diplomats. This system generated enormous wealth through strategic marriages. Each wife brought dowries, trade connections, and political alliances. The primary wife might control silver mining rights, while a concubine's family could provide access to eastern trade routes. Ides Kinshiwide, Itudananeas Pusi, Disoye, or the king's children served as diplomatic assets, sent to foreign courts to cement alliances or threaten enemies. The gods themselves practiced polygamy. Viking skalds reminded anyone who questioned the system. Hugin had numerous wives and concubines, while Thor's appetite for women was legendary. Religious ceremonies blessed each new marriage, with sacrifices ensuring divine approval. The Völva, prophetic priestesses, often advised kings on which women would bear the strongest sons. Yet this system bred constant violence. Historical records tell of wives poisoning rivals' children, arranging accidents for competitors, and forming murderous alliances against common enemies. The saga of King Eric mentions a queen who had 3 rival wives killed in a single feast, disguising their murders as food poisoning from spoiled fish. When King Gorm died in 958 AD, his death triggered a brutal succession war that would reshape Danish history. His primary wife's son Harald claimed the throne, but 6 other sons from different mothers challenged him. The resulting conflict lasted 3 years, with brothers murdering brothers and wives orchestrating assassinations. Only Harald survived, earning the nickname Bluetooth for his ability to unite the kingdom through bloodshed. The polygamous system created international complications that lasted centuries. When Harald Bluetooth married his 7 wives, he wasn't just taking women, he was signing military treaties. His Irish wife brought 200 warriors, his Saxon wife delivered access to English silver mines, while his Slavic wife provided routes into Russian fur markets. Each marriage was a calculated geopolitical move. Harald's 23 children became living weapons in his diplomatic arsenal. His daughter Gaitha was married to the Russian Prince Vladimir at age 12, cementing an alliance that would last 50 years. His son Sweyn was sent to English courts as both hostage and ambassador. Another son, Magnus, was raised by Irish foster parents, learning their language and customs to eventually lead invasions of their homeland. Maintaining this massive household required enormous resources. Archaeological evidence from Jelling shows that Harald's compound consumed the agricultural output of over 200 farms. Each wife maintained her own retinue of servants, guards, and craftsmen. The primary wife alone required 50 thralls to maintain her status, while even the lowest-ranking slave wife commanded a dozen servants. Despite appearing subservient, Viking wives wielded enormous behind-the-scenes power. They controlled the household economy, managed international trade relationships, and often served as informal diplomats. Some wives became more influential than their husband, with foreign kings sending gifts directly to them rather than to Harald. The primary wife, Thyra, actually negotiated several major treaties without her husband's knowledge. Children in polygamous households received a uniquely brutal education. They learned early that family members were potential enemies, that survival required constant vigilance, and that loyalty was conditional. Sons were trained not just in warfare, but in poison recognition, political manipulation, and how to identify assassination attempts. Daughters learned to manage competing interests within their future polygamous marriages. Each new marriage required elaborate religious ceremonies that could last for days. The gods demanded blood sacrifice to bless the union, usually involving the slaughter of horses, cattle, and sometimes human thralls. The existing wives participated in these rituals, publicly welcoming their new sister, while privately calculating how this newcomer threatened their own children's prospects. The constant need for new wives meant Viking slave markets, specialized in capturing noble women from conquered territories. Raiders specifically targeted royal courts, monasteries housing royal daughters, and diplomatic missions carrying marriageable women. These captives faced a cruel choice: accept marriage to their captor and potentially gain power, or remain slaves with no protection for their children. Pregnancy became the ultimate political weapon in polygamous households. A woman carrying a son gained enormous power, while those bearing daughters or suffering miscarriages found their status plummeting. Wives employed midwives who doubled as spies, reporting on rivals' pregnancies and sometimes arranging accidents that ended unwanted pregnancies before birth. Each wife controlled specific trade networks that connected Scandinavia to distant markets. Harald's Irish wife managed the slave trade to Mediterranean markets, while his Saxon wife controlled the flow of English silver northward. His Slavic wife organized the amber trade routes to Constantinople. The death or displacement of any wife could disrupt trade worth thousands of silver marks annually. Through his marriages, Harald commanded military forces that dwarfed traditional Viking armies. His Irish wife's brothers provided 500 warriors for his campaigns, while his Saxon wife's family contributed both troops and naval vessels. During his invasion of England in 960 AD, Harald fielded an army of 8,000 men, more than half provided by his wives' families, rather than his own Danish subjects. Viking wives created history's first international intelligence network. Each woman maintained correspondence with female relatives in distant courts, gathering information about political developments, military preparations, and economic opportunities. These letters, written in runic script that most men couldn't read, contained coded information about everything from harvest failures to planned invasions. By 965 AD, Harald's adult children began rebelling against the polygamous system that had shaped their lives. His eldest son Sweyn murdered 2 half-brothers and forced his father to exile 3 of his wives. This internal family war weakened the kingdom and ultimately led to Harald's assassination by his own children, who could no longer tolerate the constant threat of fraternal violence. Harald's death in 986 AD marked the beginning of the end for large-scale Viking polygamy. His surviving children, traumatized by their upbringing, mostly chose monogamous marriages. The church began demanding Christian marriage ceremonies, but recognized only one wife. Economic changes made maintaining massive households increasingly impractical as trade shifted to urban centers rather than royal courts. Modern excavations at Viking sites across Scandinavia reveal the physical remains of polygamous households. At Borg in Norway, archaeologists uncovered a longhouse with 12 separate sleeping chambers of varying sizes. Grave goods from associated cemeteries show clear hierarchies among buried women, some with gold and silver, others with simple iron jewelry, reflecting their status in polygamous marriages. Recent genetic studies of medieval Scandinavian remains confirm the polygamous system's extent. DNA analysis from cemetery sites shows that single male lineages fathered children with multiple female lineages within the same community. One cemetery in Denmark revealed that 31 children buried there shared the same father but had 12 different mothers, archaeological proof of polygamous practices. Viking polygamy influenced marriage customs throughout medieval Europe. Royal courts from Ireland to Russia adopted modified versions of the system, recognizing official concubines alongside primary wives. These practices survived in some regions until the 15th century, with noble families maintaining multiple marriage alliances to preserve political power and territorial claims. For Viking women, polygamy offered both opportunities and dangers unknown in monogamous societies. Successful wives could accumulate enormous power and wealth, controlling international trade networks and influencing royal policy. Yet they lived in constant fear of displacement, assassination, or seeing their children murdered by rivals. Their letters and runic inscriptions reveal a complex mixture of ambition and terror. The most disturbing aspect of Viking polygamy was the practice of ritual wife-killing during royal funerals. When King Eric the Red died in 1003 AD, his primary wife was expected to join him in death, burned alive on his funeral pyre. However, his 6 other wives faced a different fate. They were strangled by priests and buried around his ship grave as eternal servants. Archaeological evidence from Oseberg confirms these practices, with multiple female skeletons showing signs of violent death surrounding royal burial ships. Even more shocking was the practice of sacrificing children from lower status wives during religious festivals. The blot ceremonies at Uppsala required human blood to ensure the gods' favor, and children of slave wives were considered expendable offerings. Swedish archaeological sites reveal child burials with ritual cut marks, their small bodies arranged in patterns that mirror descriptions in later Christian chronicles condemning these practices. Viking kings treated their wives like livestock in carefully managed breeding programs designed to produce superior warriors. They consulted Velva priestesses who claimed to predict which unions would produce the strongest sons. These pagan geneticists maintained detailed oral records of bloodlines, matching wives and husbands based on their ancestors' combat prowess, physical strength, and resistance to disease. Viking polygamy drove the largest slave trade in medieval Europe. Each new wife required a retinue of servants, creating constant demand for captured women and children. Slave markets in Dublin, York, and Hedeby specialized in providing breeding stock for polygamous households. Price lists carved in runes show that fertile young women commanded prices equivalent to 12 oxen or 50 sheep. Modern DNA analysis reveals the devastating genetic impact of Viking polygamy. Inbreeding within royal families created numerous genetic disorders that plagued Scandinavian nobility for centuries. Hemophilia, mental illness, and physical deformities became common in elite bloodlines. Yet Vikings interpreted these problems as curses from rival wives or evidence of supernatural warfare between competing families. Polygamous wives became economic assets to be traded, rented, or sold based on their productivity. Kings often loaned wives to allies for specific purposes, negotiating treaties, establishing trade relationships, or producing heirs for childless nobles. These temporary marriages, lasting months or years, treated women as living commodities whose value fluctuated based on political circumstances. Not all Viking women accepted polygamous oppression passively. Secret societies of wives organized resistance networks that poisoned abusive husbands, arranged escapes for threatened children, and sometimes orchestrated wholesale slaughter of male relatives. The saga of Queen Sigrid tells of a wife who burned down a feast hall with 200 men inside, including her husband and his other wives' male relatives. The spread of Christianity fundamentally challenged Viking polygamy by insisting on monogamous marriage, sanctified by God. Early Christian missionaries like Ansgar faced death threats from polygamous kings, who saw monogamy as economic and political suicide. The church offered protection to wives seeking to escape polygamous marriages, creating the first medieval refugee system for abused women. Viking law codes reveal the Byzantine complexity of polygamous legal systems. Different types of wives had different legal rights regarding property, child custody, and inheritance. The Graga's legal code from Iceland details over 200 specific situations involving polygamous disputes, from cattle ownership to blood money payments, when wives murdered each other's children. Polygamous households became military units in their own right. Each wife's extended family provided warriors, creating armies bound by marriage rather than traditional loyalty. During the 1066 invasion of England, Harald Hardrada commanded forces from 7 different kingdoms, each contributed by wives or their relatives. This system made Viking armies larger, but also more unstable due to competing loyalties. Polygamous marriages created unprecedented cultural mixing in medieval Europe. Viking households spoke multiple languages, practiced hybrid religious rituals, and produced art combining Scandinavian, Celtic, Slavic, and Germanic traditions. Archaeological finds from Hedeby show jewelry designs that blend motifs from 6 different cultures, created by craftsmen working in polygamous royal workshops. The constant movement of people through polygamous networks accelerated disease transmission across medieval Europe. Plagues that began in Irish monasteries could reach Slavic territories within months through wife exchange networks. The Black Death's rapid spread through Scandinavia in 1347 to 1351 followed marriage routes established centuries earlier by polygamous Viking kings. Children raised in polygamous households suffered severe psychological damage that affected Scandinavian culture for generations. They developed paranoid personalities, inability to trust family members, and compulsive need to dominate others. These traits became embedded in Viking warrior culture, contributing to the berserker phenomenon and the intense violence that characterized Viking raids. By the 11th century, maintaining polygamous households had become economically impossible. The cost of supporting multiple wives, dozens of children, and hundreds of servants consumed resources faster than raiding and trading could replenish them. King Magnus of Norway was forced to sell 3 of his wives to Russian princes, simply to pay his army's wages during the 1045 campaign season. The collapse of polygamy triggered a social revolution throughout Scandinavia. Suddenly, ordinary men could compete for wives previously reserved for kings and jarls. This democratization of marriage created new social mobility, but also sparked violent conflicts as traditional hierarchies crumbled. Civil wars in Denmark and Norway during the 1070s were fought primarily over marriage rights and inheritance disputes. The trauma of polygamous society profoundly influenced Norse literature and mythology. The endless family conflicts, wife murders, and fraternal warfare became central themes in sagas and Eddic poetry. Even the gods reflected these domestic horrors. Loki's shape-shifting represented the deceptive nature of polygamous wives, while Odin's multiple partners embodied the chaos of competing maternal loyalties. Recent excavations continue revealing disturbing evidence of polygamous violence. At Birka in Sweden, archaeologists discovered a mass grave containing 23 women and children, all showing signs of simultaneous violent death. Isotope analysis proves they came from different regions, suggesting they were wives and children of a single powerful man killed together during a succession dispute. DNA studies of modern Scandinavian populations reveal lasting genetic signatures of Viking polygamy. Certain Y chromosome markers, associated with elite Viking families, appear in unusually high frequencies throughout regions where polygamous Vikings settled. This genetic evidence suggests that a small number of polygamous men fathered enormous numbers of children whose descendants comprise significant portions of modern populations. Christianity's triumph over Viking polygamy required compromising with existing practices rather than eliminating them entirely. Early Christian kings maintained multiple wives, but called them queens and royal consorts, rather than using pagan marriage terms. This semantic evolution disguised continued polygamous practices while satisfying church demands for nominally Christian marriage customs. Viking polygamous practices influenced marriage customs far beyond Scandinavia. Russian princes adopted wife collection strategies. Irish kings began maintaining harems, and even Anglo-Saxon nobles experimented with multiple marriages. The Domesday Book records several English estates where single lords maintained multiple wives in separate households, showing how Viking customs spread through conquest and intermarriage. Polygamous marriages created history's first multinational corporations. Viking wives controlled trade networks spanning from Greenland to Constantinople, coordinating commerce in furs, slaves, amber and silver. These business partnerships, disguised as marriages, generated wealth that funded the armies and ships that terrorized medieval Europe. The wives effectively became medieval CEOs managing international business empires. Competition between polygamous wives created medieval Europe's first professional assassination industry. Skilled poisoners, usually women, traveled between royal courts, offering their services to wives seeking to eliminate rivals. These specialists developed increasingly sophisticated murder techniques, from slow-acting plant toxins to staged accidents involving bears or wolves. Polygamous wives developed sophisticated torture methods to extract information from rivals or punish disobedient children. The blood-weaving technique involves slowly cutting patterns into victims' skin while keeping them conscious for days. Archaeological evidence from Trelleborg shows torture chambers beneath royal longhouses, complete with restraining devices and drainage systems for blood removal. Each wife maintained an extensive spy network throughout Scandinavia and beyond. Servants, traders, and even clergy reported on rival families' activities, gathering intelligence about military preparations, harvest failures, and political alliances. These networks sometimes employed hundreds of informants, creating the medieval equivalent of intelligence agencies run by competing royal wives. Viking wives became expert pharmacologists, developing drugs for everything from fertility enhancement to murder. They cultivated gardens of medicinal and poisonous plants, often disguised as herb gardens for cooking. The most skilled could create potions that caused specific symptoms, temporary blindness for warriors before battle, or miscarriages that appeared natural but eliminated rival children. Sons of lower status wives were often enrolled in brutal training programs designed to create expendable warriors. These children, knowing they had no inheritance rights, were trained from age 5 in combat techniques that emphasized berserker fury over tactical thinking. Many died during training, but survivors became the legendary Viking shock troops, who terrorized European battlefields. Viking ships often carried traveling wives, women who served sexual and domestic functions during long voyages, but held no legal marriage status. These floating brothels followed raiding fleets, providing services that prevented conflicts among crew members while generating additional income through prostitution at foreign ports. Archaeological evidence from ship burials shows sleeping areas designed specifically for these arrangements. Wives of Viking kings enjoyed unprecedented diplomatic immunity, able to travel freely between hostile kingdoms without fear of capture or assassination. This status made them ideal spies and negotiators, but also allowed them to orchestrate international conspiracies against their own husbands. Several Viking civil wars were triggered by wives who used their diplomatic protection to arrange foreign invasions. Polygamous kings spent enormous resources on succession planning, attempting to prevent the fraternal wars that typically followed their deaths. They established complex systems of rotating authority, shared inheritance, and geographic separation of sons. Yet these plans invariably failed, as the fundamental competition between wives made peaceful succession virtually impossible. Viking wives from conquered territories often maintained their native cultural practices, creating hybrid societies that blended traditions in unexpected ways. Celtic wives introduced Druidic rituals into Norse paganism, while Slavic wives brought different concepts of female authority. These cultural fusions created unique regional variations of Viking society that archaeologists are still discovering. With access to multiple pregnant wives, Viking kings often allowed vulva practitioners to conduct primitive medical experiments. They tested different herbs and treatments on pregnant women from different status levels, using slave wives as expendable test subjects, while protecting primary wives from dangerous procedures. These experiments contributed to advanced obstetric knowledge, but at horrific human cost. Children in polygamous households received education based on their mother's status and their expected adult roles. Sons of primary wives learned statecraft, foreign languages, and military strategy. Concubines' children received vocational training in crafts or lesser military roles. Slave wives' children often received no formal education, learning only basic survival skills necessary for their anticipated futures as servants. Royal longhouses built for polygamous families required specialized architecture to manage competing households under one roof. Archaeological sites show buildings with multiple entrances, separate cooking areas, and defensive features designed for internal security. Some structures included escape tunnels for individual wives, suggesting the constant threat of violence within supposedly safe family homes. Modern psychological analysis of saga characters reveals consistent personality patterns among children of polygamous marriages. They exhibited high rates of paranoid thinking, inability to form trusting relationships, compulsive competitiveness, and predisposition to violence as conflict resolution. These traits, multiplied across entire generations, fundamentally shaped Viking cultural psychology. Detailed analysis of royal household expenses reveals the staggering cost of polygamous systems. King Harald's household consumed resources equivalent to supporting 2,000 ordinary families. Each additional wife increased expenses exponentially, not arithmetically, as her status required appropriate displays of wealth. This economic burden ultimately made polygamous systems unsustainable as trade revenues declined. Armies led by polygamous kings suffered from divided loyalties and internal conflicts that often determined battle outcomes more than enemy actions. The 1043 Battle of Lyrskov Heath was lost not to Danish enemies, but because Harald's army fractured when two groups of his son's supporters began fighting each other during the engagement, allowing their opponents to achieve victory against superior numbers. Viking polygamous marriages created unprecedented diplomatic complexity in medieval Europe. Kings had to navigate relationships with dozens of foreign relatives acquired through wives, creating alliance webs that could stretch across entire continents. A single diplomatic miscalculation could trigger wars involving kingdoms that had never directly interacted before being connected through marriage networks. Polygamous households practicing different religions created unique syncretic belief systems that combined Norse paganism with Christianity, Celtic Druidism, and Slavic folk beliefs. These hybrid religions often proved more resilient than pure traditions, surviving centuries after official Christianization by incorporating multiple spiritual traditions into seemingly orthodox Christian practices. Competition between wives for their husband's attention drove technological innovation in everything from textile production to metallurgy. Each wife sought to demonstrate superior skills through increasingly elaborate crafts. This competitive environment accelerated technological development, with polygamous households serving as research and development centers for medieval innovations. Polygamous reproduction strategies created significant demographic distortions in Viking society. Elite males fathered hundreds of children, while ordinary men struggled to find wives, creating dangerous imbalances that contributed to social instability and encouraged overseas raiding as unmarried men sought opportunities to acquire wealth and wives through violence. The complexity of polygamous legal disputes forced Vikings to develop sophisticated legal systems that influenced European jurisprudence for centuries. Concepts like joint custody, inheritance rights of illegitimate children, and women's property rights emerged from practical necessity in managing polygamous households. These legal innovations spread throughout medieval Europe through conquest and cultural exchange. Polygamous households required specialized medical practitioners who understood the unique health challenges of competitive reproductive environments. Court physicians developed treatments for everything from poison detection to fertility enhancement, while also serving as forensic experts who could determine whether wives died from natural causes or murder. These medical specialists commanded enormous fees and often knew more state secrets than the kings they served. Competition between wives evolved into sophisticated intelligence operations that rivaled modern espionage agencies. Each wife maintained networks of spies, code systems for secure communication, and counterintelligence operations to protect her own secrets while stealing rivals' information. Some wives employed double agents who pretended loyalty to rivals while reporting their activities. Beyond physical violence, wives engaged in sophisticated psychological warfare designed to drive rivals insane or force them to flee. Techniques included sleep deprivation through nighttime harassment, spreading rumors about supernatural curses, and arranging accidents that created atmosphere of constant terror. Some wives specialized in gaslighting techniques that made rivals question their own sanity. Polygamous households generated enormous black market economies in everything from forged documents to assassination services. Wives secretly funded criminal enterprises that provided services too dangerous for legal channels, disposing of inconvenient bodies, creating false genealogies to support inheritance claims, or smuggling banned substances for murder plots. These underground networks operated across international boundaries. Ironically, polygamous marriages helped preserve cultural traditions that might otherwise have been lost to conquest and assimilation. Wives from conquered territories maintained their languages, crafts, and customs within royal households, creating cultural museums that preserved traditions for centuries. Many aspects of Celtic, Slavic, and Germanic culture survived through polygamous preservation rather than direct cultural continuity. Competitive pressure between wives' families drove military innovation as each group sought advantages over rivals. Here, different cultural military traditions combined to create new weapons, tactics, and strategies. Celtic flexibility merged with Germanic discipline and Slavic archery techniques to produce more effective fighting forces than any single tradition could achieve alone. Supporting massive polygamous households required enormous natural resources that contributed to environmental degradation across Scandinavia. Forests were cleared for building materials and fuel, while overhunting depleted game populations. Archaeological evidence shows environmental stress around major royal centers, with soil depletion and deforestation patterns directly linked to polygamous household demands. Competition between wives for cultural prestige drove unprecedented artistic innovation in Viking society. Each wife patronized artists from her homeland while encouraging fusion with Norse traditions. This competitive patronage system produced hybrid art forms that combine motifs, techniques, and themes from multiple cultures, creating distinctively new artistic traditions that influenced medieval European art for centuries. By 1100 AD, the last great polygamous Viking households were collapsing under their own contradictions. The economic costs had become prohibitive, Christian pressure was overwhelming, and the social violence was destroying entire kingdoms. The final generation of polygamous kings died without male heirs, their sons having murdered each other in succession wars that left only daughters to inherit depleted kingdoms. Modern historians struggle to evaluate Viking polygamy objectively, balancing its role in cultural preservation and political innovation against its obvious brutality and exploitation. While the system created unprecedented international networks and drove technological advancement, It also normalized violence against women and children that influenced European culture for centuries. The legacy remains deeply ambiguous, simultaneously progressive and horrifying. Recent advances in genetic archaeology continue revealing the extent of Viking polygamous reproduction. DNA analysis of medieval European populations shows that small numbers of elite males contributed disproportionately to modern gene pools, with some Viking kings having thousands of living descendants today. This genetic legacy means millions of modern Europeans carry DNA from polygamous Viking households. New archaeological techniques continue uncovering evidence of Viking polygamous practices previously hidden from historical record. Ground-penetrating radar reveals previously unknown longhouse foundations designed for multiple families, while chemical analysis of medieval textiles identifies fabrics from around the world that evidence international marriage networks. These discoveries suggest polygamous systems were even more extensive than previously believed. Contemporary social scientists draw parallels between Viking polygamous systems and modern phenomena like corporate dynasties, political families, and entertainment industry networks where power concentrates among small numbers of connected individuals. While legal polygamy has disappeared, similar patterns of elite interconnection through marriage continue influencing power distribution in modern societies. The Viking polygamous system ultimately failed because it contained internal contradictions that made long-term sustainability impossible. Yet, its influence on European development was profound and lasting. From legal concepts to genetic diversity, from cultural preservation to technological innovation, the polygamous households of medieval Scandinavia helped shape the Europe we recognize today, even as their brutal practices remind us of the human costs of unchecked power.